Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I'll be your guide to a journey through the top ways to deliver your code to the cloud. My name's Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate for Microsoft. Let's get started. So we're going to talk about four specific things today. We're going to talk about what is DevOps. We're going to talk about DevOps with GitHub specifically. I'm going to show a demo, which is most of the presentation about DevOps in action. We're actually going to take a GitHub repo. We're going to deploy it to an Azure App Service. And I'll show you all the steps you have to go through to make that happen. Not only that, but every time there's an update to the app after that, there would be a push to the app service again. Last but not least, I'm going to talk to you about how you can keep your investments as well. So let's get started. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is DevOps, just so everyone's on the same page. This is a great quote from a colleague of mine, Donovan Brown. DevOps is a union of people, process, and products to deliver to enable the continuous delivery of value. And the main things to focus on there is people, process, products, and value. Each one of those things is important, so let's break them down. People. You hear this all the time. It works on my machine. Why? I don't know why it's not working in production or in your machine. Who's supporting what? Who's actually solving a problem? Who's responsible for a problem that we found? Where's my code? Where is the code stored? Where is the code in the process for a new feature that's coming up? How can I get an update, not just to the software, but to the project in general? And how's the timeline going? Where is everything at in terms of our delivery dates? These are the kinds of things that people need to know when you're working on a good software project. Basically, the way to handle that is through process and products. So it's incredibly important to have a good process. Here's a typical software development lifecycle with planning, developing, testing, release, and monitor and learn. Each one of these things is very, very key. Quite often, monitor and learn is the thing that's overlooked in product software development because you're so busy just delivering on the features that were asked and making the deadlines that you might not have a look back and reflect on, did this update actually solve the problem it was intended to solve? It's a harder problem than most people think. And if you have a good process, then the planning, developing, and testing, releasing will all support monitoring and learning to make sure that everything was delivered and you have time to actually reflect on what was done and what needs to be done in the future. Products are key to this as well. So you have your people, you've got a good process. Now you need products to support the people in the process. At Microsoft, we have GitHub, we have Visual Studio, and we have Visual Studio Code for developers. We have several other tools as well, but those are the ones we're going to highlight today. And then for delivery, we have Azure Pipelines, we have GitHub Extensions, and what we're going to focus on today is GitHub Actions. Managing and securing, and this is part of monitoring and learning as well. Making sure that we have Azure policies in place where you can actually force compliance to organizational rules and actually external governmental rules or any other compliance requirements you might have. Azure Automation that helps implement policies and security, and also Azure Security Center. Microsoft literally spends billions of dollars on keeping ahead of the latest security threats out there in the software world. All right, so how do we deliver on those? Just a little of a deep dive in some of these. We're going to focus on GitHub today, but we do have other things as well. We have Azure Boards, we have Azure Pipelines. Azure Boards are Kanban boards, a great way to organize your tasks so that the people who are planning things can pass communications on to the developers and the testers about what they're expecting. It's a great way to integrate with GitHub as well. I strongly recommend you have a look at that if you aren't using Kanban boards or need to integrate it into your GitHub workflows or any kind of DevOps workflows you have. There's also Azure Pipelines, which is a robust way for deploying software with multi-stage environments and tons of integration with other software. We have Azure Artifacts for storing artifacts and Azure Test Plans for testing. But today we're going to focus on GitHub because I'm going to show you GitHub Actions. And I'll talk a little bit about extensions as well. How we integrate with Azure and other clouds. This is not just, I'm going to show demos that deploy to Azure, but you could actually do similar things with third-party offerings that are part of the GitHub ecosystem in the Actions marketplace that you can use to deliver multi-cloud deployments as well. One thing I wanted to mention, in case you haven't been keeping up, GitHub was purchased by Microsoft many years ago now, and at the time, private repos were charged. There was a charge for private repos, and there was a charge for team repos. Both of those are free to a certain point now, so I urge you to have a look at that. And code spaces. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about code spaces. So GitHub, for those who might not be familiar, most folks are at this point. It's kind of like the seatbelt instructions on an airplane. I think GitHub is around. It's been around for a while. It's the largest developer platform on earth. Most developers have heard of it. Here's some of the stats. One of the things I like to show here, because I don't always have the most up-to-date stats in this slide, it changes every day. GitHub itself produces this report called the State of the Octaverse. So there's 40 million developers when we created that slide, but they've actually, this is pretty cool. They go and they produce this every year, and it basically is an analysis of all the GitHub repos they have on their ecosystem. And here's some of the new numbers. 2021, 16 million new users, 61 million new repositories, 73 million more developers on GitHub, and several other things. 170 million pull requests merged. There's a whole bunch of stats here. Great distribution here. The folks in Europe, hello MS Stage. Folks in Europe have a larger cohort than they did last year. And some of the top languages, this is one I really find interesting. So JavaScript, Python has exceeded Java this year. TypeScript is there as well. PHP is a little lower than C#. And yeah, you can get a ton of information from here. So I highly recommend that you just search State of the Octaverse, and you'll find out more information there about that. But getting back to GitHub, just talking about what you can do with GitHub. It's a great home for developers, of course. It supports CI/CD. It's the world's largest ecosystem for code sharing, and you can deploy to anywhere. On the right, this is definitely not to be neglected. I like to always make this point because I'm going to show Azure, as I mentioned, but you can also deploy to AWS, Google Cloud Platform, on-prem, and other platforms as well. So one of the key features brought into GitHub a few years ago is GitHub Actions. And GitHub Actions basically enable powerful, flexible CI/CD. It's natively integrated with GitHub. It's automated. There's a ton of examples out there. If you need one, you can go to the the GitHub Marketplace and find the action you need. 9 times out of 10, it's already been built and shared, or you might have a vendor that's built one for you. Here's a little shot of the GitHub Marketplace itself. And all of the leading cloud providers do participate in the GitHub repos and the GitHub Actions that we have for Actions. And there's a lot of different languages. I'm actually going to show Java as a language today, but any one of the languages that that you work with daily are going to be represented in GitHub Actions, and has the same exact workflow I'm going to show in our app today. GitHub Mobile. This is something that's overlooked. I use this all the time. It's pretty cool. You can do things like check in on your repos, check in to see if issues have been resolved. You can trigger actions. You can do all kinds of things here. And highly recommend folks check out GitHub Mobile as well. One thing I really like to highlight is code spaces. So code spaces is a way to use any browser, so any machine, any browser, to have an integrated development environment into your GitHub repo. Over on the right, where you used to go and grab your Git link, now if you drop down that drop down, you can actually see a whole bunch of new options, and one of those options is run code spaces in this GitHub repo. And what it'll do is it'll start this thing called a runner, and the runner actually runs code spaces inside of it, and you can predefine those code spaces, so you can have a standard for your organization that has code spaces there. And it's a container that actually runs on top of the code spaces environment with a customized IDE in that case. All right, so that's just a really brief coverage of what we have to offer at Microsoft and for DevOps and deploying your apps to the cloud. And let's get right into the demo. I'm going to show a little bit about A/B testing, blue-green deployments, and let's get started. So the first thing I like to show is the actual app itself. So this is the end result. This is a totally different app that I built a while ago. It's just a simple little app with Bit, our developer advocate. And one of the things I'm going to show you here, so there's two things I'm going to show you, is the app. This is running on Azure Web Apps. If you look at the URL up at the top here, .azurewebsites.net is a giveaway for that. I'm going to show you something you can do with this. You can turn on and off features in this running application without having to redeploy it by using what we call app configuration. In this case, I've got an app configuration tool called DevOps for GitHub Features. And if I go down to my feature manager, I've got a feature that's been enabled, a feature flag. I can disable this flag. And what's going to happen now is if I go in here and refresh, eventually, takes a second sometime. There it is. So what happens is Bit disappears. I just want to show you you can add it or delete features by just changing this feature flag. And by the way, I can set up this one flag to enable or disable multiple different applications as well. So let's go back. I just re-enabled it. And there he is. He's back again. Okay, so that you give an idea of what feature flags can do. You can also do A/B testing with those, and I'm going to cover that towards the end of the presentation as well. So to get started with this, I'm going to show you the portal for Azure. This is portal.azure.com. For those of you who have a subscription, you're probably familiar with this. If not, if you go to portal.azure.com, you can sign up for a free trial. And basically what I do, I organize things in my Azure portal the way that I work, and that is highly recommended for everyone. For me, because I do a lot of presentations, so I break it down by events that I'm doing or demos that I have. In this case, this is my MS Stage page, and I've got some markdown over here. And I've got something called an Azure Resource Group here. So an Azure Resource Group is a way of grouping new or grouping application resources into a logical container. It's not a Docker container or anything like that. It's just a way of storing things and relating them to each other in Azure. So that's what resource groups are called. And inside my resource group, I've got several applications here, but I'm actually going to create a new application in this case, an Azure web app. And we're going to take some code from this repo, Benz DevOps for Java Shops test feature flags. And you can look that up in my repos. If you go to Benz, DevOps for Java Shops test feature flags is there, and you can follow along. I even have a sample GitHub workflow that we're going to use to enable an action in there. So anyway, to do that, what I want to do is just go new, web app, create. I'm going to create a new web app. The resource group I want to use in this case is called DevOps for Java Shops. The web app name is going to be called MS Stage Demo. Yeah, you got the little check mark there. That means that it's an existing one that we can use. We're going to use code. We're going to use Java in this case. And I've actually got to pull this down. I always forget to do that. It's because I've got the text enlarged, so I don't see things the way that you might see them when you're looking at the dashboard. Java SE is the thing you want. And then we're going to have a app service plan. It's in, I already know it's in West US 2. These are all the locations we have. And we're going to use our Java Shops application environment that we already have created. Next, we look at deployment. And we're going to enable continuous delivery. And we're actually going to connect to that GitHub repo I showed you over there. So we're going to use Benz for the GitHub. We're going to have the organization, Benz. I'm going to choose the repository called DevOps for Java Shops test feature flags. And we're going to use the main branch. There are no other branches in this particular one. And what this is going to do, it's going to create a GitHub Actions workflow. And once that workflow is created, we have to go and fix it because it's going to crash the first time. And I'm going to show you why. It's important that I showed you that feature manager in advance so you understand how this is actually going to happen. For this case, it's a demo app, so we don't need to enable application insights, but it is pretty cool. You can keep track of your application and monitor it. It just adds a little time to the demo. So I'm going to skip it this time. And I'm also going to skip tags, but tags are a way of organizing things across different resource groups inside of your cloud environment that you have set up with your subscription. I'm going to say create. And what this is going to do, okay, so deployment is in progress. Great. So what it's done is it's connected to my GitHub repo. I had already put my password in advance. Normally it asks you for your password. Now, if I go back into my repo, you're going to see something here. You should see a GitHub action. Not yet. Okay, let's see the workflows. Yeah, there it is. So the MS Stage demo is actually there. So we go back into Actions now. There we go. So there it is. The Azure App Service workflow. It created a default template workflow for us. But there's one problem. So this is going to fail. We'll just let it fail. And then I'll explain to you what happened. Because this is important. I could show you the really simple demo where you just deploy stuff and wow, look, it works. But this is 9 times out of 10, you need some extra stuff inside your application to connect to other things in the cloud or on-prem or anywhere else. So you do need to have a little bit of information about how that works behind the scenes. So behind the scenes, if you remember, I showed you this feature manager. So the feature manager turns on and off this bit. Now, how do you actually connect the feature manager, which is a totally different thing, from the app service that we just created? Well, you create it through a, if we go into the feature manager itself, there is a access keys. Don't worry, they're encrypted. So they're hidden. And I want this connection string. So basically what I've done is I've taken this connection string in advance, actually, and I've copied it into my GitHub repo. You put that in settings under secrets for actions. So here's the secrets. And actually there's a bunch of publishing profiles too. I should have deleted these old ones, but you can see the one that just got created. So this publishing profile connects my GitHub repo to my app service. That's a very important. That was created automatically when I connected the two together as part of this deployment process. But the one I wanted to show you was this app configuration connection string. This is the string that you need to connect the app service to the feature manager. And it would be the same idea if you're connecting to a database or anything else. The idea here is you can have all the code in your GitHub repo, but these secrets are only available to you and a select number of people who are authorized to look at them and see them. Even if I want to update this right now, it's not going to show me the old one. It's actually going to hide it, and I have to just paste a new one in. So the security is there, and there's a couple different ways you could do that, but this is a really good way to do it with app configuration connection string. So the reason why this is going to fail, let's go back to that repo for a second, actions, and there it is, it failed. The reason why it failed is because I didn't set up that connection string yet. The string is in my repo, but I don't have it instructed in that template that got created to connect to the app service. All right, so if we go into the code and we go into GitHub workflows, MS Stage demo. So what I need to do here is right here, I need to paste some code. Well, luckily, I have the code. If you go down here, for anyone who wants to follow along this later, you can find the code to actually reference that here in this file, which is called provided GitHub workflow YAML. So let's go back to our code again, GitHub workflows. We're going to edit this and we're going to add that right where it should be, which is right. Whoops, I have to edit this file. And by the way, you probably shouldn't do it this way. You should probably, in the case of a demo, I could do it this, but if you normally want to do this, you probably want to make a local clone. save it, and then commit it. But this is going to do a similar commit right now. It's just everything else is the same. But this is just going to use that app configuration connection string. It also uses that publish profile that we have here to actually publish things to the app. All right, so let's start that commit and add secret to YAML. Okay, commit changes. We're going to commit directly to the main branch. Once again, if you got a bunch of people working on this, not a good idea to do it like this because you might overwrite or create a conflict with the workflow if anyone else is working on it as well. All right, but in this case, what's going to happen now is that commit is going to trigger a new add circuit to the YAML. We're not done yet. We're actually not done yet. Now, that is great for deploying the app and connecting the app, because what happens inside this build is it needs to be able to reference in the Maven here, which is a package manager in Java, if you're not familiar with it. Inside Maven here, it needs to be able to reference that secret in order to build the jar file that gets deployed to the Azure App Service. Okay, so that's going to work, but then the app itself doesn't have that reference to the feature flag yet. It's a brand new app, and as you saw, I created it right in front of you. It didn't have that. So anyway, the build succeeded this time. The deployment's going to succeed, but the app itself is not going to work. So let's just hang out here for a second and see how the deployment goes. And there we are. Deployment happened. So if we go into the deploy stage and we go deploy to Azure Web App, I can see that it has deployed to msstage.demo.azurewebsites.net. I'm going to click on this. It's not going to work. Bum, bum, bum. There you go. Application error. Yay. And actually, because this is the actual correct URL that we want to get to that particular Java app, it's still going to give us an error. Now, there's a couple things you can do at this point. Here's something cool. msstagedemo.scm. So you can actually look in, this is something called Kudu, and it's something you can use to do a little analysis on this web app. And this works on any web app as long as you have access to the web app itself. If you try it on mine, it's not going to work because you're not authenticated. But I can go in, for example, and I can look at the root of this, and I can see that the jar file that we want to run, actually deployed correctly. Everything's good. All right. The next thing we want to do, we can look at deployments, and you can see that there's a deployment record, and it doesn't look like there's any errors in there, so that's great. There's all kinds of things you can do in here as well in terms of files and Docker logs and things you can just to analyze the application. But I already know what's wrong with it, so I'm cheating a little bit here. I just wanted to give you a little demo of what you can do with that. So let's go into the actual app itself. That's this one here. So your deployment is complete. And what we want to do is we want to go to the app itself. Go to resource. It's right there in front of me. Okay. And from here, I can go into my configuration. And what I want to do here is I want to add a, not a connection string. In this case, it's an application setting. New application setting, and I know it's called app configuration connection string. Have you seen I've tested this before? Let me get that string, which I have hidden off screen. I trust you guys, but I can't do this. Microsoft frowns on us sharing all this info. Okay. Put this in here. Okay. So that creates the connection between the feature flag. So I'm going to save this between the feature flag and the app service. Now it should work. There is one more thing I might have to do. I can't remember if I already did it, but let's just test this out. So if I go back to overview here, okay. I'm not using log4j, so that's okay. msstagedemo.azurewebsites.net. Takes a second to load up. Takes a second to load up. Okay, so that is a good error message. That's the error message you want. Because now, when we go welcome, yay, there we go. So that's a cool thing. So the application is working. If I go into the feature manager, so now if I turn off, just to illustrate this, if I go into the feature manager, I turn off this feature, not only will it work in my new MS Stage demo application, if I refresh it a couple times, there we go, but it'll also work in the previous application that I showed you that I had pre-baked. Now, if I turn it back on, it turns it back on in both. So that gives you an idea of the kinds of things you can do with the feature flags inside of there. Another thing you can do, I can actually add a feature flag. I mentioned A/B testing. Don't forget the A/B testing I mentioned. So let's do A/B test. I can create a feature filter for this. So it's not just manually turning it on and off. I can target it, and the targeting allows you to set certain locations and regions for this, or certain groups of folks who are going to reach out to it. You can adjust the percentage. So the default percentage could be 50%. So 50% of a certain group of people or a predefined set of users is going to see a new feature and the others won't. Or your account managers can see something on the same website as your customers that they can't see. Things like that. Or you can set up a time window. So if you have a holiday coming up and you want to put a banner on the page saying something about the way things are going to change in your organization for the holiday, you can put that up and you can set a start date and time for that. The last but not least, you can set up a custom, and the custom can be a percentage, targeting, or window. And with these, you can set up a JSON. You can predefine some JSON that gets put in here. You can say percentage, for example, 50. And when you set that up, the 50% will be, it's going to actually set this up. You can move contexts and add them up and down as well. I won't apply it here, but you get the idea. So there's a whole bunch of different things you can do with the feature flags to do A/B testing. And let's talk about blue-green deployments as well. So if we go back into the app service itself, here it is here. There's something called deployment slots. And deployment slots are cool. Right now, it's just this one application for the deployment slot. But if I want to, I can add a slot, and we'll call this beta. Add this slot. Takes a second. And what this will do is it'll create another endpoint for this web app. It's taking a little while there. There we go. Okay. So we got this. I can change this to 50-50. So this is another way to do A/B testing where the people will hit the website instead of using Feature Manager. If you just want to have everything standalone in your app service, this is a second way you can do A/B testing. So you set up 50% of the people will see the beta version of this, and you can deploy to the beta with actions just the way you deploy to the main production environment. And 50% of the people will see the new features in the beta. And you can also do this thing called swap. And what swap will do is take beta, put it into production, take production, put it into beta. That's another way to do it as well. And what that'll do is just quickly swap everything out into production. And if something goes wrong, nothing ever does, of course, but if anything ever does, you can swap them back, which is kind of handy as well. You can also do blue-green deployments this way. So you can slowly adjust who sees the website until 99% of the people are seeing the new version, and then just swap it over using the swap or simply deploying to the production environment with the same exact environment using a separate GitHub action. So that's the kind of thing you can do with that. I'm going to discard that. All right, so I showed you how to set up from a brand new web app to connect that to your GitHub repo, and then connect that GitHub repo, set up a couple of settings. Oh, one other feature that I should mention that's important here. If you go into configuration, so I mentioned before I might need to have this setting set up, and I wasn't sure if I did it or not. General settings, there is another thing here for a startup command. So if you have to have a startup command, for example, if you need, in this case, this was actually automatically selected by the container that's running inside the app service. But if you have a startup command that you need to actually make your container start, you can do that right here in the startup command. And there's a few other things you can do here to make sure that you have, for example, require a client certificate for connected applications as well, and a couple other settings. I won't go into all the details, but that's kind of cool. And then, of course, if you have a connection string for a database, you put that in here. These are all, when you edit this, you can see that their settings are encrypted at rest and transmitted over an encrypted channel. You can choose to display them in plain text, and that's not a good idea. But you can also set up environment variables. There's also a thing called Azure Key Vault you can use for connecting that as well. All right, so that's building the app. We got the app going. Let's refresh it a couple times. There's a bit back because I re-enabled that. So everything's back to normal. Okay. All right, so that's the demo. I showed you, end to end from app service connecting to a GitHub repo. Oh, and by the way, if I make any changes to that GitHub repo because of the way the action is set up, any changes that we push to the main branch will trigger a new build and a new deployment out to Azure. There are ways to control that, to put in security as well. Obviously, you don't want to have things going straight to production whenever something gets pushed to your repo. There's different ways organizationally. You can set up a fork and pull arrangement where people issue pull requests, and then you update the main branch with those pull requests after you run some tests and things. There's also manual and automated security that you can build into your action to do that. But I just want to show you a really, really, really simple action for that. All right, so let's say you like GitHub Actions, but you're already invested in DevOps. And if you're invested in DevOps already, that's not a problem. Here's that software development lifecycle that we talked about earlier. Plan and track, development test, release, and monitor and learn. There are a ton of applications here that you might already be using to do some of this stuff. Let's say you're using Jenkins or GitLab for doing your building and your testing, and you've made quite an investment in that infrastructure organizationally. So say you have Chef and Puppet for rolling out and managing your infrastructure, or Ansible. Not a problem at all. We have inside of GitHub Actions and also inside of Azure Pipelines a ton of integrations. We work directly with a lot of these partners to make sure that the tools you're familiar with still work with what we have here. So for example, if you do build and test with GitLab or Jenkins, and you might have some infrastructure tests on your application using any of these tools here, you can still use those. And then you pass the actual compiled binaries to GitHub Actions or to Azure Pipelines, and you can store those artifacts. GitHub actually has an artifact storage as well, so not just Actions, you can actually do package management as well, and as well as Azure Pipelines has one too. Both of those have integrations that you can use for building those, doing your build and test outside of our environment. And then what you do is you add Azure tools, Azure Pipelines, GitHub Actions into that for deployment. And the reason why you want to do that is because you have an integrated environment. As you saw there with that published profile in GitHub Actions, for example, you have an integrated environment where you can control who has access to your production applications and who actually gets the right to push to your repo and control your code. So there's a whole bunch of security and compliance requirements that you want to think about when you're doing deployments that you don't necessarily need to worry about when you're doing build and test. Other than that, there's some third-party tools you can get that do all kinds of compliance checking on your dependencies and your applications. For example, if you're using some open source libraries and packages, that's really valuable as well. And last but not least, I want to show you just how you enable that. So let's go back into the browser here. I mentioned before, so here's my action. That's the one that worked. Now, if I go to just the main page here, I mentioned that code. So I can go to code spaces now, and I can actually set up a new code space for this environment. And inside that environment, I can pretty much do anything I want to that I did before. And I can set up a code environment in my VS Code. So if I'm using Visual Studio Code Desktop, which is our open source text editor, you can actually do that. I just want the light theme. Why are they making me do this? Okay. I don't actually need to do that. So the code is over here. So I can just start working with the code. So if I look, for example, in my GitHub, if I want to mess with that YAML, it's right here. This is in a container. So when I'm done, I actually need to push this to my repo. So this is separate. What happens is GitHub Actions will grab my repo, put it into a container, and when it's running in this container, it's actually a separate version, as if it was running on a local machine or elsewhere. It's not directly editing your YAML file the way I did on the GitHub action to add the secret. It's not doing that. So if I add the secret here, then I actually have an edited file, and I need to push this back to my GitHub repo before it'll work. And when I'm done here, I can actually save this. This is all in the browser, by the way. If you notice here, here's my other browser tabs. Once I'm done with this, I can just say change YAML again, and I can click here, and it's going to say there's no stage changes because I'm lazy. I didn't stage it first. And I can just say sync, and that's going to do a push and a pull to my GitHub repo, which is separate from my other repo. So when I come back in here, now if I go to actions, it's actually changed my YAML again, and it's triggered a new build and deployment out to Azure. So that's kind of cool, huh? So there's my GitHub code space. And like I say, you can create these things called dev containers, which controls the environment that you have. If you have an organizational requirement for certain things, you can do that through here. In this case, I just used the default and changed my YAML file, just added a space, and it's just building it and pushing it out, which I know is going to work because I just added a space. That's all right. YAML isn't that finicky, is it? Okay, so that's it. I just wanted to show you that one last little thing. It's kind of cool. All right, and so let's review. What is DevOps? Talked about that. DevOps with GitHub. Demo, DevOps in action, and you can keep your investments. Here's some docs for this. So everything DevOps at Microsoft is at AKMS DevOps Resource Center. And these are generic DevOps topics for helping your organization get set up with DevOps. And then if you want specific things to Azure, AKMS Azure DevOps Docs is where you need to go. And that's it. Thank you for joining on this journey through the top ways to deliver your code to the cloud. My name is Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and you can find me on Twitter at bbenz, also on GitHub at bbenz if you want to look at that repo. You'll be able to actually look at the workflows that I literally just created. They'll be there, just sitting there in the repo. You can't run them, and you can't push to my repo itself, but everything's there. So thanks for joining me, and have a good day.